Hey guys, tonight we drift through the shadowy corridors of an ancient Roman domus, where oil lamps flicker against polished plaster walls and the air smells faintly of warm bread and olive oil. You're lying there, halfway between dream and wakefulness, when somewhere in the courtyard an amphora lid clinks against clay and a servant mutters about the day's chores. Outside, the street is still dark, though a pale dawn haze curls over the tiled rooftops. A rooster, somewhere not yours, obviously, because you're far too dignified for livestock, decides it's time for everyone to wake up. You probably won't survive this, at least not without your morning honey water and a bit of drama about who gets the last slice of fresh bread. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling chatty, drop your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The domus around you stirs. Servants pad across mosaic floors, carrying baskets of figs, olives, and barley loaves. The marble under your bare feet feels cool, a little too cold for your liking. But it is a reminder that wealth has its quirks. You get fine stone floors instead of drafty wood. But you also get a morning chill that bites at your toes. Somewhere in the atrium, the household shrine your family's laarium is tended to by your mother. You catch the scent of incense, sharp and resinous, curling upward as she murmurs a prayer to the household gods. The water clock in the corner drips steadily, its bronze bowl filling drop by drop. This, for Romans, is the slow heartbeat of time, the subtle reminder that even in a world of empire, breakfast will not serve itself. Your father's voice booms from another room, not in anger, not yet, but with the commanding tone of someone reviewing the day's plans. He's discussing accounts, shipments of olive oil, maybe even the rent from a tenant farm. These conversations sail right over your head, but they give you a comforting sense that the household machine is running. Then comes the clink of terracotta cups as the first meal is set out. The Romans don't really do breakfast the way you might expect. No eggs and bacon here. Instead, there's simple bread dipped into watered wine or sweetened with honey. The bread smells incredible, a yeasty, warm aroma that floats through the house. And for a moment you forget you're still sleepy. You shuffle to the table, feeling the hem of your simple tunic brush your knees. As you chew, the morning bustle becomes background music, the scuff of sandals, the creak of the courtyard gate, the faint shout of a street vendor already hawking dates. It's a reminder that beyond these walls lies the thrum of Roman life, merchants, beggars, politicians, and thieves, all jostling for space in the same streets. Historians still argue whether the typical urban domus was truly a serene retreat, or more like a noisy hub that just happened to have nicer furniture. After breakfast, the slaves begin their own routines. One sweeps the mosaic floors in long, careful arcs, trying not to scatter dust into the air. Another polishes the bronze fittings on the door, while a younger boy hauls amphorae of fresh water from the fountain down the street. You catch sight of the cook checking the pantry. He frowns, muttering about the lack of fresh fish, which probably means someone will be dispatched to the market soon. There's a certain rhythm to all of this, the household waking in layers, each roll ticking into place like cogs in a watermill. And you, as one of the younger members, aren't exactly the first gear in motion. You get to linger a little longer by the hearth, watching the light spill slowly into the impluvium, the open pool in the center of the atrium that catches rainwater. This morning, the water's surface is perfectly still, mirroring the pale stripes of dawn. You hear your mother call out instructions for the day. She wants the wool merchants to be paid, the garden to be watered, and the wine jars in the cellar checked. She also tells you, with that familiar raised eyebrow, not to wander into the street chasing stray dogs. Which, honestly, is unfair because you only did that one time and the dog wasn't that stray. There's something oddly intimate about these mornings, the mix of order and chaos, tradition and improvisation. The same rooms have echoed with the same sounds for generations, and yet each day is a little different. You know that after this quiet hour, the rest of the day will be louder, hotter, and busier. But right now, you're in that in-between space, the house breathing awake, the city still stretching its limbs. And there's always one small, quirky detail that catches your eye. Today, it's the servant girl balancing a stack of freshly washed tunics on her head, while also carrying a bronze pitcher in one hand. She doesn't spill a drop, doesn't even wobble. You make a mental note to try it later, even though you read pretty sure it'll end with someone yelling about laundry in the fountain again. You pad across the room to peek out into the street. A donkey cart trundles by, loaded with amphorae, the driver shouting something about fresh olive oil. A couple of children, probably from the insulae, the tall apartment blocks, dash past, barefoot and laughing. The smell of baking bread wafts from a nearby Pestrina, the communal bakery. Even at this early hour, Rome's heartbeat is steady, unhurried, and unstoppable. Inside, the household is already settling into its groove. The paterfamilias, your father will soon head out, perhaps to the forum, or to oversee business. Your mother will manage the estate's affairs from within these walls. And you'll be expected to fit into the day's plans, whether that means lessons, errands, or, if you're lucky, sneaking away for some mischief. For now, though, you just lean against the cool marble pillar, listening to the scrape of pottery, the soft flap of a curtain, the faint coo of pigeons on the roof. It's a world both alien and familiar, ancient in its rituals, but human in its warmth. And as the morning sun finally floods the atrium, you take one last deep breath of the bread and olive scented air before stepping forward into the day. You don't remember your own birth, of course few people do, but here in ancient Rome. It's not just a moment for exhausted parents and wailing newborns. It's a full-on ritual, steeped in a strange blend of religion, superstition, and practical survival. The morning you arrived, the midwife wrinkled, stern, but with surprisingly gentle hands lifted you up and inspected you for signs of good health. A strong cry was essential. If you didn't cry, that would be, well, let's just say the atmosphere would have shifted dramatically. Your father, the paterfamilias, had the final say in whether you were accepted into the family. This wasn't symbolic. He could literally decide to keep you or not. You were placed at his feet, swaddled tight, and if he bent down and picked you up, that was the signal you'd be raised in the household. If not, well, you don't really want to think about the alternatives. Historians still argue whether infant exposure leaving unwanted newborns. Outside was common practice or rare in respectable families, but the possibility hung in the air like a quiet, unspoken rule. Once accepted, the house turned into a stage for tiny charms and whispered blessings. A small amulet, the bulla, was prepared for yuan ornament you'd wear until adulthood to protect against the evil eye. People believed that ill will could be transferred through a glance, and Roman relatives were nothing if not paranoid about that sort of thing. The amulet might contain herbs, tiny carved figures, or even scraps of metal inscribed with protective symbols. Your mother, pale from the ordeal but fierce in spirit, oversaw the sprinkling of salt and the fumigation with burning laurel. The air smelled sharp, smoky, and almost medicinal. Somewhere, in the background, a family slave hummed a lullaby, something you'd come to recognize years later as an old rural tune from the Sabine Hills. The swaddling was tight, and when I say tight, I mean Roman parents believed in wrapping you so snug you looked like a small linen sausage. They thought it helped limbs grow straight, kept you warm, and prevented you from flailing yourself into harm. Whether you were comfortable or not, irrelevant. Your job was to look adorable, stay alive, and hopefully not cry too much while people argued over whether your nose looked like your father S or your grandmother S. And of course, no Roman birth was without a nod to the gods. The Lares, those household deities, were thanked for protecting the mother and child. Offerings of honey cakes, wine, and incense were placed in the little niche shrine, the smoke curling upward like a quiet promise. Meanwhile, out in the wider city, the news of your arrival trickled through the network of acquaintances, traders, and extended family. The gossip mill in Rome spun fast, and a new child was always a fresh talking point. Then came the less poetic part, survival. Rome, for all its grandeur, was not exactly germ-free. Infant mortality was high, and so parents leaned heavily on ritual, diet, and a cautious watch for illness. A midwife might insist on certain charms. One particularly odd superstition involved tying a wolf's tooth near the crib to guard against fevers. Did it work? Hard to say, but no one wanted to be the one to risk testing it. In the days after your birth, your world was small and dim, the dim interior of the domus. The creak of wooden shutters opening in the morning, the shuffle of sandals over stone floors. UDB moved from room to room, depending on the light and the temperature. Romans were oddly particular about keeping infants in good air, though opinions on what qualified as good air varied wildly. Some insisted on fresh breezes. Others feared drafts like they were poisonous. On the 8th or 9th day, depending on whether you were a boy or girl, there would be a small naming ceremony, the dies lustricus. The midwife, who by now had become your first unofficial guardian, would ensure you were bathed and dressed in fresh cloth. The family gathered, and your chosen name was announced, usually honoring ancestors or reflecting some family aspiration. Names were serious business in Rome. They carried history, political weight, and in some cases, the faint hope that you'd live up to a distant relative's legendary career. After the naming, more offerings were made, and the bulla was placed around your tiny neck. The feeling of the cool metal or leather against your skin would be one of your first tactile memories. Whether comforting or mildly irritating depended on your temperament. The adults sipped watered wine, chatted about omens, and if they were superstitious enough, consulted a soothsayer about your future. Some relatives might bring gifts, little bronze rattles to amuse you, or figurines of animals meant to guard you in dreams. One great aunt swore by hanging sprigs of rosemary above your cradle. Another insisted you needed a tiny scrap of purple cloth tucked into your swaddle for luck. Romans loved their superstitions so much that you could probably have been buried under amulets and herbs by week 2. But for now, your life was measured in naps, feedings, and the soft murmur of voices drifting through the atrium. The marble columns, the painted walls, the flicker of oil lamps, all of it, forming the first hazy impressions you decarry in your mind. And while you couldn't yet know it, these early days would set the rhythm of your Roman childhood, a mix of formality, superstition, and those rare, quiet moments when the city outside seemed far away and the world was no bigger than your mother's arms. Somewhere, out in the courtyard, a pigeon cooed. A slave swept the stone floor, each stroke a whispery lullaby. And above you, the gods in their little shrine kept their unblinking watch. You're too young to know the politics of it. But the choice of who feeds you is not just about milk, it's about status, family connections, and sometimes gossip that could sink a household's reputation. In your case, your mother, like many respectable Roman matrons, chooses a wet nurse. She doesn't make this decision lightly. It is not that she can nurse you herself, it is that in her social circle breastfeeding is seen as a full-time job, and she's got estates to manage, guests to receive, and a reputation to maintain. The wet nurse arrives one morning, stepping through the doorway with the quiet confidence of someone who has been here before. Her tunic smells faintly of clean linen and warm milk. She's not from Rome, her accent, rolling and lilting, hints at the countryside. Maybe Etruria or Gaul. Historians still argue whether most wet nurses were slaves, freedwomen, or hired locals. But in this moment, she is your whole world. She scoops you up, tucks you against her, and hums a tune you've never heard before but somehow recognize instantly. You don't care about her status. You care that she is warm, that her heartbeat is steady, and that her voice vibrates through your tiny bones like a promise. She knows exactly how to hold you so you can breathe easily while feeding, how to rock you so the hiccups vanish, and how to pat your back without jolting you awake again. The arrangement isn't just about comfort. Romans believed a wet nurse's character could influence the child's. They genuinely thought her temperament, morals, even her accent might shape your own personality. Your father, therefore, took care to choose someone of good nature, which, in Roman terms, means she's healthy, disciplined, and unlikely to teach you strange provincial words. That's the theory, anyway. In practice, she will slip you a few of those rural sayings, and they will stick with you forever. There are practical rituals, too. Each morning, before you feed, she washes her hands, and sometimes even rinses her mouth with wine, yes. Wine, because someone once decided that made the milk better. Does it? Probably not. But you'll grow used to the faint tong of it. The room smells of milk, olive oil, and the faint sweetness of the honey cakes she eats between her duties. She isn't just here for you, either. She's part of the household now, woven into its rhythms. She be the one to hush you when guests arrive, to keep you quiet during your father's afternoon nap, to carry you to the garden for fresh air when the kitchen smoke gets too thick. She know your cries better than anyone your I'm hungry cry. Your I dropped my rattle cry, your I just feel like being dramatic cry, and like any human, she has her quirks. She talks to you as if you're an adult, explaining why the neighbor's rooster crows too early, or muttering about the baker's latest price hike. She sometimes rock you near the window, pointing out the passing carts and street performers. You'll stare wide-eyed at a flute player weaving through the crowd, not realizing that this is one of your first glimpses of the sprawling city beyond your marble-pillared home. Of course, there are moments when the system falters. One day, she eats something that doesn't agree with her, and your stomach protests in sympathy. Another time, you pull at her necklace until it snaps, sending a bronze charm clattering across the floor. She laughs, scoops it up, and says something under her breath that you never understand, but will remember as the warm vibration of her voice. The rest of the household adjusts to her presence. The cook learns to set aside her preferred meals. The laundress keeps an extra eye on the linens. Even your mother, who is used to being the center of your attention, grows accustomed to sharing you. She might stop by in the afternoon to hold you, inhaling your baby scent before handing you back. A silent, not acknowledging the strange partnership that keeps you thriving. And then there's the small, quirky detail of the cucullus, the tiny, hooded wrap she uses to shield your head from drafts when carrying you outdoors. Some swear it prevents earaches. Others claim it's simply to keep the sun out of your eyes. Either way, you become known on the street as the little one in the hood, which is a much gentler nickname than some you'll collect later in life. The wet nurse will stay with you for years, far longer than the modern idea of baby care. She may be there when you take your first steps, when you speak your first words, when you first manage to grab a piece of bread for yourself without dropping it. She will tell you stories not the grand epics of Homer, but small, earthy tales of foxes in vineyards and clever geese outwitting dogs. Stories that stick because they're soft enough to fall asleep to. One evening, when the courtyard is warm with the smell of flowering vines, she will rock you until you're nearly asleep, murmuring that one day you'll be too big for her arms. You, of course, will disagree by drooling on her tunic, and she will smile because in the quiet glow of a Roman domus at dusk, some truths are better left unsaid. The day of your dies lustricusure, naming day feels like the first time you are officially noticed by the gods, the neighbors, and every nosy relative within shouting distance. You're still small enough to fit comfortably in the crook of an arm. But today you are a central figure in a ceremony that has been performed in Roman households for centuries. The house is in a low hum of activity. Servants sweep the atrium until the mosaic floors glisten, and someone polishes the bronze lamp stands so the light will catch them just right. In the kitchen, the cook fusses over honey cakes, muttering about whether the oven's heat is suitable for pleasing divine palates. You're swaddled in your best linen, soft against your skin, and already you can sense something is different. The air is scented with laurel and incense, and people keep smiling at you in that exaggerated way adults do when they read pretending you understand the importance of the moment. The paterfamilias your father takes his place at the center of the gathering. He holds you for a moment, and you can feel the vibration of his voice in his chest as he announces your name to those present. For a boy, it's a prenomen, nomen, and cognomen, 3 parts to carry family honor. Lineage, and sometimes the pressure of a heroic ancestor you've never met. For a girl, the rules are simpler, but no less weighty. Often your name is a feminine form of the family's nomen, a reminder that you're part of a broader clan. There's a small murmur among the guests' approval, perhaps surprise. Naming could be political, especially in patrician circles. Sometimes names honored allies. Sometimes they were a subtle jab at rivals. Historians still argue whether Roman families used the naming ceremony as a way to make statements to their peers. But standing there, in your swaddle, you're blissfully unaware of the layers of meaning in your brand new identity. After the formal announcement, your mother steps forward to present you to the lares, the household gods. The shrine in the atrium is bright with fresh flowers and miniature garlands. A servant sets a small dish of grain before the statues. Another pours wine into a shallow cup. The smell of incense is almost overwhelming, but it mixes with the comforting aroma of bread just pulled from the oven. The family's prayers are murmured low, their rhythm hypnotic. Then comes the part you will grow to hate, the miniature toga. It's not as grand as an adult's. Of course it's scaled down for a baby. But it still has more folds than a city laundry shop. The cloth wraps around you in careful layers, pinned just so. You squirm, you kick, you protest in the universal baby language, but the adults coo about how adorable you look. Somewhere, an aunt is already predicting you'll be a senator or a proper Roman matron before we know it. Once you're dressed, guests bring small gifts. Some are practical, a tiny rattle made of bronze, a wool blanket. Others are symbolic, a carved ivory amulet to hang near your cradle, a small clay figurine of Fortuna for luck. One uncle, who clearly enjoys a laugh, slips you a knucklebone from a gaming set, muttering that it'll keep you out of trouble when you re old enough to gamble. And then there's the bulla, the amulet you'll wear until you reach adulthood. Your father fastens it around your neck himself. For boys, it's usually gold. For girls, perhaps leather or cloth. Inside might be a charm, a scrap of parchment with protective words, or even a tiny carved phallus. Yes, the Romans thought this shape warded off evil. You'll grow so used to the weight of the bulla that you'll forget it's there, until the day you no longer wear it, and adulthood feels suddenly heavy in a different way. The rest of the day is more relaxed. The household shares a feast platters of cheese, olives, and fruit, washed down with watered wine for the adults and watered honey for you when you're older. The laughter echoes under the high ceilings, mixing with the clink of cups and the occasional squawk from a chicken in the courtyard. Neighbors stop by to offer blessings and, more importantly, to get a look at your family's latest addition. You spend most of it being passed from one pair of arms to another, your face pressed against tunics that smell of wool, oil, and the faint trace of street dust. You drift in and out of sleep to the sound of conversations plans for the coming festival. Debates about grain prices, jokes about the senator's terrible haircut. By evening, the oil lamps are lit, their warm glow turning the walls' painted frescoes into something soft and dreamlike. The crowd thins. Your parents, perhaps a little tired themselves, retreat to the quieter rooms. Your wet nurse gathers you back into her arms, loosening the tight folds of the toga so you can breathe and wriggle. Before you drift off, you catch sight of your bulla glinting faintly in the lamplight. You don't yet understand what it means, but you sense it will be with you for years silent, steady, like the gods who watched you take your place in the family today. And in the darkened atrium, the small offerings at the shrine burn low, their smoke curling lazily upward, as if the gods themselves are sighing in approval. The marble floors of the atrium are beautiful cool, smooth, and inlaid with mosaics that tell stories you won't understand until you re-older but they. Also treacherous when you just learning to walk. You're a small figure in a too long tunic, clinging to the edge of a column, while your wet nurse hovers nearby like a hawk guarding a particularly clumsy chick. Your first steps are not taken in grassy gardens or soft sand courtyards, but on this polished stone. Each wobble sends your arms pinwheeling, and each small slip earns a sharp inhale from any adult in the room. A fall here could mean more than a bruise. Romans are well aware of how hard marble is. And while they're proud of their flaws, they'd rather you didn't test them with your skull. So they develop tricks. A slave lays down woven reed mats in certain hallways, so you have safe landing zones. Someone else, probably your wet nurse, carries you through the more dangerous areas, though you protest because your legs are certain they can handle it. They cannot. Not yet. The courtyard becomes your training ground. Its floor is smoother, with fewer steps to trip over, and the sunlight here is kinder than the dim, echoing atrium. You grip the edges of the impluvium, that shallow pool of collected rainwater, and toddle around it like a sailor clinging to the edge of a ship. Sometimes a servant will float a laurel leaf on the water just to make you smile. You lean forward, fascinated by the ripples, forgetting entirely about walking until your wet nurse pulls you back to safety. One quirky detail of Roman child rearing is that you're often barefoot indoors. The marble can be shockingly cold in the morning and pleasantly cool in the heat of the afternoon. Some adults believe this helps toughen you. Others mutter about drafts and insist on wrapping your feet in scraps of cloth. The two schools of thought coexist, which means some days you run free and other days you look like your toes have been mummified. Your first triumpher, solid 10, steps from one pillar to another is celebrated like a military victory. Your father laughs, clapping you on the shoulder in a way that nearly topples you over again and declares you ready for real adventures. Your mother smiles in that measured way, perhaps imagining you walking into the Senate one day, not realizing your current ambitions extend no further than chasing the household cat. Of course, there are setbacks. Once, you take a bold step toward a platter of figs and slide spectacularly, ending up flat on your back. The figs survive, your pride does not. Another time, you manage to toddle all the way into the triclinium, only to be scooped up and removed because children don't belong in the dining couches during formal meals. You register your protest by wailing so loudly that even the neighbor's parrot joins in. The adults try to make the process more interesting. One slave rolls a painted wooden ball just out of your reach, urging you to chase it. Your wet nurse hides behind a curtain, peeking out so you'll toddle toward her. Your mother dangles a small bronze rattler, gift from your naming day, and shakes it gently until you stumble forward with determination. Historians still argue whether Roman parents were generally affectionate or distant with their children. In your case, affection seems to be the rule, plenty of kisses on the head when you succeed, gentle scoldings when you get too close to trouble. The household is a web of watchful eyes. Even The gardener, in the peristyle, will set down his shears to steady you if you wander too close to the fountain. One afternoon, the entire house seems to pause when you manage to walk across the courtyard without falling. Your steps are slow and deliberate, your arms slightly out like a balancing tightrope walker. The wet nurse holds her breath. You reach the other side, grip the edge of a column, and grin as if you've conquered the 7 hills of Rome. In a way, you have your own personal empire, just expanded. And then, because you are still very much a small child, you promptly sit down and begin gnawing on the hem of your tunic. Triumph tastes like dust and linen. As the weeks pass, walking becomes less of an event and more of a skill you use to get into mischief. You follow the cook into the kitchen, where you're promptly shooed out before you can get near the fire. You trail after the laundry slave, fascinated by the way she wrings water from the cloth. You even make a daring attempt to follow your father out the front door one morning, stopped only by the doorman, who laughs and says you're a few years too early for the forum. But the marble floors, once intimidating, are now your familiar territory. You know which spots are slippery after a fresh sweep, which corners hide a dust moat worth chasing, and which pillars you can loop around without toppling. The house no longer feels like a giant, echoing place where adults move quickly and you move cautiously. It's becoming yours. Step by step, tiny sandal mark by tiny sandal mark. And somewhere in the background, the gods in the household shrine watch with their eternal patient expressions, perhaps, amused that the great future of Rome is for the moment entirely wrapped up in a small person learning how to stay upright. You follow a narrow path between rows of villas, each with small gardens enclosed by low stone walls. The air smells faintly of rosemary and baked earth, and the chatter of servants drifts from open windows. You've been shadowing the life of a Roman child for a few years now. Well, in your mind anyway, and you can see they moving from the wild playfulness of early childhood into the more structured, expectation-heavy world of young learning. It's the moment when wax tablets and styluses begin to feel less like toys and more like daily assignments. Inside one villa's atrium, a boy sits cross-legged, scratching out careful letters onto his wax tablet while his mother leans over his shoulder. She corrects his form, her tone halfway between patience and irritation. Literacy here is a prized skill. Only a small fraction of the population will ever fully master reading and writing, and it's something reserved for families with resources. Wealthy Roman children learn Latin first because, well, that's the language of their world, but Greek often follows soon after. The logic. Many of Rome's greatest works of philosophy, science, and literature are borrowed from the Greeks, so why not read the originals? The boy's father passes through, tossing a casual reminder about proper letter forms. He also mutters about not wasting wax, because those tablets aren't cheap. You see the boy sigh, in a way you might, if someone told you Wi-Fi isn't free anymore. The whole process has an air of seriousness, as if every scratch of the stylus is an investment in his future career as a politician, lawyer, or at least a well-spoken dinner guest. Historians still argue whether literacy rates were higher among the elite than we assume, or if the ability to read often meant little more than recognizing basic inscriptions. Either way, the family's investment in education is as much about status as it is about knowledge. Step outside, and the scene shifts. In a courtyard, a group of less wealthy children cluster around an older boy who can sound out basic sentences. They take turns tracing letters in the dirt with Styx Nature's cheapest chalkboard. There's a teacher, of sorts, nearby. He's probably paid in bread or favors, not coins. The shade of the portico is their classroom, and pigeons are the only audience for their recitations. And then there are the fringe approaches to early learning. You hear whispers about families hiring Greek slaves as living tutors, not just because they're educated, but because it's a flex to have one. These tutors might sneak in philosophy lessons alongside grammar, drills, slipping moral ideas into stories about gods and heroes. The children might not realize they're reabsorbing subtle lessons about ethics, or at least about how not to anger Zeus. Of course, memorization reigns supreme. There's no Google, no notebook apps. Your memory is your library. Kids chant poetry aloud, the rhythm acting like a mental hook. A group of girls in a garden recite lines from Ennius while weaving flower crowns, the flowers wilting faster than their concentration. One girl giggles when she forgets a verse, and the others shush her with mock severity, quirky detail. Sometimes children practice on leftover shards of pottery called a stracker. Imagine doing your math homework on a broken piece of your mom's favorite vase, though here it's just recycling. That's the Roman way. If it has a surface, it's a writing tool. Meanwhile, the physicality of learning is unavoidable. A stylus can be dropped, a tablet's wax can melt if left in the sun, and ink stains are permanent. You picture some poor Roman kid explaining to their mother that the family S-scroll now looks like it has been attacked by an octopus. And, much like your modern-day procrastination habits, Roman children had theirs slipping. A way to play with a ball in the street instead of mastering their declensions. The day's lesson often ends when the sun dips low enough to make reading difficult. Artificial light is costly, and parents aren't going to waste expensive oil just so their kid can conjugate verbs after dark. The child you've been shadowing closes his wax tablet, and a small sigh of relief escapes him. Another day of letters, numbers, and the slow grind of shaping a Roman mind is complete. Tomorrow will bring more repetition, more recitations, and more subtle layering of skills that, in theory, will transform these small humans into functional, respectable Romans. Whether they actually become scholars or just well-practiced parrots of Latin verse, that's still up for debate. But for now, they're kids, and you can almost see them itching to ditch the lessons for a good game of knucklebones in the fading light. By now, you've survived swaddling, wonky-teething remedies, and the occasional nod from a stern grandmother who's been keeping score. Now, you're finally old enough to be noticed beyond your own household. That means your education starts whether you like it or not. Imagine yourself, small sandals kicking up dust as you follow your father down a narrow Roman street. The air smells faintly of baking bread and, less pleasantly, the day's refuse tossed in the gutter. You're being taken to your first real lessons. For wealthy families, this might mean a private tutor at home. A learned Greek man with a beard you could hide an entire loaf of bread in, quoting Homer before breakfast. For the rest, like most Romans, it's a group trek to the Ludus Literarius, the primary school. You sit on low stools in a cramped room, sunlight filtering in at odd angles, a wax tablet on your lap. Your stylus just a thin metal point is ready for action. First task, learn the letters. You scratch them carefully, watching as the wax curls up under your hand. Mainstream fact, Romang. Children started with the abecedarium there, version of the ABCs, reciting them aloud in sing-song until they stuck. Quirky tidbit. Some teachers believed that making kids write the alphabet backward was a good brain exercise. Imagine your wax tablet filled with mirror image letters, like you're trying to summon a literacy ghost. The teacher, called a literator, isn't particularly gentle. His job isn't to make learning fun. He is here to drill discipline as much as knowledge. That might mean rapping your knuckles with a stick if you daydream about figs instead of focusing on Latin declensions. Historians still argue whether the notorious strictness of Roman schooling was exaggerated by later writers, or if it truly was that harsh day-to-day. For now, you keep your head down, quietly chanting along with your classmates. You smell the faint tongue of lamp oil, the rustle of parchment, the occasional cough. Outside, street vendors call out prices for olives and bread, their voices competing with the teacher's commands. Around age 12, things get more serious. Boys in well-off families might move on to a grammaticus, where literature and history join the mix. You sit in a larger room, reading from scrolls about heroes and philosophers. There, adventures rolling across your imagination. Girls, well, it depends. Some are kept at home, learning household management instead. Though there are rare stories of girls receiving the same schooling as boys, especially in intellectual families. Still, even without formal education, you absorb knowledge everywhere, overhearing debates in the forum, watching your parents haggle in the marketplace, learning the social rules that weave through daily life. Your brain becomes a sponge knot for math homework, though there's plenty of that. But for understanding how to navigate Roman society. Now and then, you wish you could skip lessons entirely. Maybe fake a cough and stay home. But know your father believes education is your stepping stone to respectability. In his eyes, every wax tablet you fill is one more brick in the wall of your future. By the time you're edging into your mid-teens, childhood in ancient Rome starts to look a lot less like playtime and a lot more like training camp for adulthood. The way society sees you changes sharply, especially if you're from a respectable family. You're no longer just pure or puella boy or girl. You're a future citizen, worker, or if your family is ambitious political mover. For boys, the path is often well defined. At about 14 to 16, you might start apprenticing under your father or another male relative. If your father's a craftsman, you'll spend hours in his workshop, the smell of wood shavings or molten bronze clinging to your tunic. If he's a merchant, you're learning how to calculate prices with wax tablets, read contracts, and sweet-talk customers into buying one more amphora of wine than they planned. If you're the son of a senator or equestrian family, life is less about manual labor and more about oratory, the art of public speaking. You'll shadow your father to the forum, watch him deliver speeches, and maybe even practice declaiming in front of a mirror-polished bronze plate. Roman politics ran on speeches the way a tavern runs on wine. Without them, nothing flowed. Girls' lives depended heavily on their family's wealth and attitudes. Some girls of affluent households continued their education learning Greek, literature, music, philosophy skills that made them respected hostesses in political circles. Others were trained in managing estates, overseeing servants, balancing household accounts, ensuring supplies were stocked for winter. Whether noble or modest, the expectation was the same: preparing for marriage. Speaking of marriage, Roman society didn't exactly wait for people to feel ready. Girls could be married as early as 12, though more often a little older, boys a few years later. Sometimes these matches were made to cement political alliances or business ties. Imagine being handed a ring and a stranger's name, and being told, "Congratulations, you're family now." Romantic love, that was a nice extra, but not the main goal. Leisure, however, still existed, and it was deeply woven into Roman culture. You might attend games at the amphitheater, watching gladiators clash beneath the hot sun. You'd cheer, or at least pretend to, as wild animals prowled the sand. Afternoons might be spent at the public baths, not just for washing, but for gossip, massages, and even exercise. The thermi were like today's gym, spa, and cafe rolled into one. Festivals punctuated the year with bursts of color and noise. The Saturnalia was the wildest winter festival where roles flipped, masters served slaves. Gambling was allowed, and everyone wore colorful caps. For a few days, the rigid Roman hierarchy loosened, and laughter carried through the streets long into the night. But beneath all this bustle, the transition from childhood to adulthood wasn't just about age, it was about responsibility. Boys might don the toga virilis, the plain white toga of a grown man, in a formal ceremony before the gods. Girls might receive a new hairstyle or take on symbolic household duties. These weren't just clothing changes, they were public announcements. You are no longer a child. From here on, the decisions you make matter to your family's reputation, to your social standing, even to your own survival in a city where fortunes could rise and fall faster than the tide of the Tiber. You don't know it yet. But in just a few short years, you'll be part of the very machine you've watched your parents turn, earning, bargaining, hosting, politicking. Childhood has given you the tools. Now, Rome will demand you use them. Stepping into adulthood in ancient Rome wasn't a quiet, private affair. It was loud, public, and full of meaning. The city itself seemed to take notice when someone crossed that invisible threshold from youth to responsibility. And once you were there, life could unfold in very different ways depending on your gender, class, and even luck. For young men of the wealthier classes, the first years of adulthood might be spent in further study. You could be sent to Greece to polish your rhetoric, learn philosophy, and mingle with intellectuals. Athens, Rhodes, and Alexandria were like international university centers of knowledge that could turn an ambitious Roman youth into a persuasive politician or skilled lawyer. Education wasn't just about learning. It was about networking with the right people, building relationships that might later secure you votes, contracts, or allies in the Senate. If you weren't of the elite, your path was far more practical. You might join a family trade full-time, open a small stall in the marketplace, or start work as a hired laborer. Some joined the military, often willingly, sometimes as a necessity. For many poor Roman men, the army offered steady pay, food, and the possibility of land after years of service. But it also meant leaving home for long stretches, marching across foreign provinces, and risking your life in battle. For young women, the first years after marriage were critical. Running a Roman household was no small feat. It meant managing slaves if the family could afford them, overseeing food storage, budgeting, and keeping an eye on everything from weaving production to social invitations. A wife of a senator might host lavish dinners, where every guest list and seating arrangement could mean political opportunity or disaster. A farmer's wife might spend dawn to dusk in the fields and kitchens, her hands rough from work, her mind constantly planning for the next harvest. Social obligations grew heavier too. Romans lived in a culture obsessed with dignita's personal reputation and fama public opinion. A single misstep losing your temper in the forum, being too frugal at a feast, or hosting the wrong kind of guests could tarnish your family's image for years. Everyone watched everyone else, and gossip spread faster than a charioteer rounding the Circus Maximus. Religion also took on new weight in adult life. As a child, you may have watched the household priest paterfamilias make offerings to the Lares and Penates household gods. Now, you might be leading those rituals yourself or ensuring they were performed correctly. Public festivals weren't just for fun, they were acts of civic duty. Skipping them without a good reason could brand you as careless or disrespectful to the gods. The city itself could be both exhilarating and exhausting. Rome was enormous for its time over, 1 million people at its peak and full of opportunity if you knew where to look. Markets bustled from sunrise, bathhouses filled in the afternoon, and political speeches echoed in the forum. But with opportunity came risk. Crime was common, fires broke out often, and disease could sweep through crowded neighborhoods without warning. Through it all, adulthood in Rome meant carrying the weight of your family name, whether it was famous or forgotten. Every decision what business to start, whom to befriend, whom to marry off your children to was a brick in the structure of your life. Some built villas, others ended up with nothing but rubble. And yet, even in this high-pressure environment, there was room for small joys. A quiet drink of spiced wine with friends at sunset. A stolen moment in the gardens, the thrill of a chariot race, the laughter at a street performer's act. These moments reminded you why you worked so hard, why you navigated politics, balanced ledgers, and guarded your reputation so fiercely. Because in Rome, life was never just about surviving. It was about being remembered. And adulthood was where that memory began to take shape. As you settle deeper into adulthood, family life becomes the heartbeat of your world. Whether your household is sprawling with slaves and sprawling villas or modest and bustling with tradespeople. The Roman family is a tightly woven unit where roles, responsibilities, and expectations are clearly defined yet full of surprising complexity. Your paterfamilias remains the legal head of the household, wielding absolute authority over property, finances, and even life and death decisions, though by your time, the most extreme powers are rarely exercised. You learn early that pleasing your father means more than just obeying orders. It is about honoring the family-s legacy and ensuring the family-s name remains untarnished. The materfamilias, your mother or wife, depending on your role, rules the domestic sphere. She manages everything from food supplies to slaves, making sure the household runs smoothly and guests are received with proper decorum. Her skill in managing the home can elevate or sink the family's social standing. You come to understand that while she may not hold political office, her influence echoes through the walls of your home and the circles you move in. Children, of course, are central. Sons are raised with the expectation that one day they will carry the family name, inherit property, and continue traditions. Daughters are trained to marry well and oversee their own households. Their success measured in alliances formed and children born. Historians still argue whether daughters were valued as equals or more as instruments of political and social strategy. But the emotional bonds within families often defy such simple categorizations. The family dinners are more than just meals. They are performances where alliances are forged and maintained. You notice how seating arrangements reflect status, and how conversation weaves through politics, philosophy, and daily gossip. These evenings also offer rare chances to relax, laugh, and connect, moments you treasure amid the weight of responsibility. Yet, family life isn't always idyllic. Rivalries simmer beneath polite words. Inheritance disputes flare into bitter arguments. The line between family loyalty and personal ambition blurs. You've heard tales of siblings plotting against each other for a bigger share of the estate, of marriages arranged to settle grudges as much as to unite houses. Despite this, you find comfort in rituals, the morning salutations to the household gods, the shared prayers at festivals, the lighting of lamps in the evening. These acts remind you that your family is part of something larger, woven into the fabric of Roman society and the favor of the gods. Occasionally, you catch yourself daydreaming of a quieter life, perhaps a villa in the countryside. Olive trees swaying in the breeze, fewer worries about politics and social standing. But the city calls you back, its energy relentless, its demands unyielding. In Rome, family is everything, the foundation of identity, security, and legacy. And as you live your days within this complex web, you realize that the history of Rome isn't just in grand battles or political speeches, it's in the intimate sometimes. Messy, always vibrant lives of families like yours. Public celebrations in Rome aren't just about fun, they're a way of reinforcing social bonds, honoring the gods, and reminding everyone of their place in the grand Roman story. As you grow older, you start to appreciate how these festivals shape your life, weaving threads of religion, politics, and community into one vibrant tapestry. Take the Saturnalia, for example, the most famous of all Roman festivals. It happens in December, turning the city upside down for several days. Masters serve slaves, gifts are exchanged, gambling is allowed, and social rules loosen. You join the throngs in the streets, wearing a colorful pileus, a soft cap symbolizing freedom, laughing as the world tilts on its head. Historians still debate how much of Saturnalia's chaos was official policy and how much was popular tradition, but either way, it's a highlight of your year. Another festival is the Lupercalia, a wild, noisy celebration involving goat sacrifices, masked priests running through the streets, and fertility rites that make even your father blush. You watch in fascinated horror as young men dash about, slapping passers-by with strips of goat skin to promote fertility and ward off evil. The mixture of fear, excitement, and the smell of smoke is intoxicating. Religious processions punctuate the calendar too. You see the pontifex, Maximus the chief priest leading ceremonies at the temple of Jupiter, his robes flowing as he offers prayers for Rome's safety and prosperity. You feel the weight of history in these moments, the invisible threads tying you to centuries of tradition. But festivals are also political. Public games, gladiator fights, and theatrical performances are often sponsored by wealthy patrons hoping to curry favor with the populace. You watch the crowds roar as charioteers race in the Circus Maximus. The dust and sweat mixing in the air, the stakes higher than any modern sports final. The politics behind these games are as fierce as the races themselves. Your own participation is limited. Of course you're still a child learning the rules, but the excitement, the colors, the smells, and the sounds become etched in your memory. These communal moments make you feel part of something bigger, a vast city pulsing with life and purpose. Between festivals, daily rituals at home keep your connection to the gods alive. You help light the oil lamps at the household shrine, offer small gifts of fruit, and listen to stories about how the gods shaped the world. The sacred and the mundane blend seamlessly. Through it all, you realize that in Rome, life is a continuous performance, a dance of piety, politics, and pleasure where everyone knows their part. You're learning the steps. The schoolroom isn't the only place where lessons in Roman life take hold. Around the bustling marketplace and along the crowded streets, you absorb the unwritten curriculum of daily survival and social grace. Here, children learn as much by watching adults as by reciting their lessons aloud. You watch as merchants haggle fiercely over the price of oil, their voices rising and falling like music. You see slaves navigating the delicate dance of obedience and subtle resistance, sometimes offering a sly smile, sometimes disappearing into the background like shadows. You learn that a nod can mean a greeting or a warning, depending on who's giving it. Even the sounds teach you something. The clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones signals the arrival of the town criers, who shout out news and decrees, their voices carrying across the piazza. The shrill call of vendors hawking fresh bread or ripe figs competes with the laughter of children chasing each other past the fountains. Quirky fact: some Roman children carried tiny whistles not for play, but to alert their families if they got lost in the busy streets. These whistles, made from bone or metal, were often decorated with charms to protect the child from harm. Imagine the chaos if half the city started blowing whistles at once. Historians still debate how much freedom children truly had in such crowded urban settings. Were they allowed to roam freely, exploring and making their own mistakes, or were they closely supervised to keep them safe and respectable? Either way, you sense the streets are both playground and classroom, full of lessons in negotiation, observation, and endurance. One day, you see a small group gathered around a storyteller in the forum. He's weaving tales of Hercules and Romulus with dramatic gestures, pulling the crowd into ancient myths that explain how Rome came to be. These stories are part history, part legend, and part moral guide, a shared culture that binds Romans across generations. At home, the lessons continue. You learn table manners during family dinners, where dropping a piece of bread might earn a disapproving glance or a whispered correction. You practice greeting guests with proper respect, knowing that a careless gesture could ripple into gossip. Through these everyday interactions, you grasp the subtle codes that govern Roman life. The city is a stage, and every one child or adult has a role to play, a part to learn and perform with care. As the years move on, you become more aware of the weight of tradition pressing down on your shoulders. Roman children weren't just expected to grow up. They were expected to become good Romans models of virtue, discipline, and respect for the past. You start noticing the little signs everywhere, the carved family busts in the atrium, the worn scrolls on the shelves, even the way your parents speak about ancestors like old gods themselves. Education continues, of course, but now it's more focused reading epic poetry like Virgil's Aeneid, memorizing speeches, and practicing rhetoric until your tongue feels like a soldier's sword. These lessons aren't just academic. They're training you to wield words like weapons or shields in the political arena. Girls often learn a different kind of wisdom, household management, weaving, and social skills necessary for navigating the complex networks of marriage and alliance. Though some girls in wealthy families might study literature or philosophy, many are groomed for their role as wives and mothers. You hear whispered debates among scholars today about how much intellectual freedom Roman women actually had. Some argue it was severely limited. Others point to exceptions that challenge the rule. Outside the classroom, physical training is part of daily life, especially for boys. You practice throwing the pilum, a kind of spear, wrestling, and running, preparing for the possibility of military service. Gladiator games and athletic contests inspire you, though you know very few will ever become champions in the arena. Still, discipline and strength are valued traits. One quirky custom you encounter is the bulla, the amulet you wore as a child, which you're now expected to lay aside as you enter adulthood. Giving it up is bittersweeter, symbol that the carefree days of childhood are ending and the responsibilities of the citizen begin. You remember how heavy it felt against your chest, and now its absence feels like a new kind of weight. The city itself feels different now. What once seemed vast and overwhelming is becoming familiar streets, shops, temples, all etched into your daily rhythm. You start to notice details, the graffiti scratched on walls, the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from bakeries, even the subtle change in light as the sun sets behind the Capitoline Hill. Roman life is a blend of grandeur and grit, tradition and change, public spectacle and private ritual. As you stand on the cusp of full adulthood, you realize that your upbringing was not just about survival, but about carrying forward a legacy, one that will shape Rome's future in ways you can only begin to imagine. Life in Rome isn't just about learning your letters or mastering the family rituals. It's also a constant balancing act between personal ambition and public expectation. You start noticing that every choice you make, no matter how small, ripples out beyond your own life. Wearing the right clothes, speaking at the right moment. Even how you laugh at a dinner party can affect how others see you and your family. One day, you overhear grown-ups discussing patronage, a system where powerful people provide support money, protection, favors in exchange for loyalty and services. You realize that your family's standing depends heavily on these networks. Your Father-S patrons and clients form a complex web of influence that reaches through the City-S politics, business, and social circles. It's a game where reputation is currency, and a single misstep could mean losing everything. Your education in rhetoric suddenly feels more urgent. You're not just learning to read and write. You're learning how to persuade, to charm, and sometimes to manipulate. Oratory skills become weapons, shields, and currency all at once. You practice speeches in front of mirrors, your voice echoing against marble walls, dreaming of someday addressing the Senate or the people of Rome. Meanwhile, the city pulses with energy and tension. You attend public games, watching charioteers race at dizzying speeds, the crowds roaring like a living beast. You listen to poets reciting verses that glorify Rome's past and inspire hope for its future. These events aren't just entertainment. They're reminders of Rome's power and destiny. Quirky detail. Some young Romans believed carrying a piece of amber or a coral charm could protect them from the evil eye during public speaking or competitions. Imagine clutching a pebble as you stride onto the forum stage, hoping it boosts your confidence or wards off awkward silences. Historians still argue about how much pressure Roman youths actually felt to conform versus how much room there was for individual expression. Your experience suggests it was a delicate dance learning to fit in while standing out, to honor tradition while carving your own path. Through all this, you understand that becoming a Roman citizen isn't just a legal status, it's an identity forged through education, family, and the unending performance of public life. You're no longer a child, but a participant in a city that never truly sleeps, always watching, always judging. As you approach the final years of your youth, you start to grasp the deeper significance of the rites of passage that mark your transition into full Roman adulthood. The toga virilis ceremony is the most important of these, a symbolic moment when you shed the toga praetexta of childhood, with its purple border, and don the plain white toga of manhood. It's a public declaration. You are now a citizen with rights and responsibilities. The ceremony itself is often held on a special festival day or during the spring, accompanied by speeches, prayers to the gods, and sometimes gifts from family and friends. You feel the weight of the wool on your shoulders, a reminder of the heavy expectations now resting on you. It's not just a garment. It's a mantle of duty, loyalty, and honor. If you're a young woman, the transition is less formalized, but no less significant. Marriage marks your full entry into adult society, with all its expectations and challenges. You learn how to manage a household, raise children, and maintain your family's social standing. The public and private spheres blur here, with your influence extending through social networks and family ties. The city itself seems to echo your personal growth. The forum bustles with politicians debating the future of Rome. Temples stand proud as places of worship and civic pride. And the Colosseum roars with gladiatorial contests that remind everyone of the city's might and its darker entertainments. Quirky detail. Some young men wore rings with secret compartments tiny, almost magical containers meant to hold love notes, poisons, or even good luck charms. Imagine the intrigue behind such small objects, hidden on the fingers of those destined to shape Rome's future. Historians still debate how inclusive these rites really were. Were they open to all citizens equally, or did wealth and status quietly determine who could truly participate? The answer is complicated, layered, with social nuances that make every ceremony a political statement as much as a personal milestone. As you step fully into adulthood, the city's pulse matches your own heartbeat, full of promise, tension, and endless possibility. You carry with you the lessons of your childhood, the hopes of your family, and the weight of Rome's history, all woven together like the threads of a finely embroidered toga. By now, the child who once toddled awkwardly across marble floors is a young adult, ready to take on the roles and responsibilities that Roman society demands. But the journey from infancy to adulthood was never just a series of milestones. It was a complex, layered process shaped by family, education, religion, and social expectations. You remember the days when a wax tablet was your playground, and the household gods watched silently as you learned to walk, speak, and understand your place in the world. Those early years set the foundation for everything to come, embedding the values and skills that would carry you through life's unpredictable twists and turns. As an adult, you now stand in a city that pulses with energy, temples echo with prayers. Markets buzz with commerce, and the Colosseum thunders with the cheers of thousands. Your life is woven into this grand tapestry, your actions part of Rome's ongoing story. Whether you pursue politics, trade, or family life, you carry the legacy of your upbringing with you. One final quirky detail: some Romans believed that children who survived their early years were protected by genius spirits, personal guardians who watched over them throughout life. These invisible companions were thought to guide your choices and shield you from harm, whether you believed it or not. The idea was comforting, a reminder that even in a vast city like Rome, you were never truly alone. Historians still debate how universal these experiences were. Did all children receive such structured upbringings? How did the vast diversity of Roman society, from slaves to senators, shape childhood and adulthood? The answers remain a fascinating puzzle, one you've only just begun to piece together. As your eyes grow heavy and the sounds of ancient Rome fade into a gentle silence, remember this: the story of how Romans raised their children is not just history, it is a mirror reflecting the timeless dance between nurture, society, and the hopes we place in the next generation. Now, as you settle down, let the quiet rhythms of the past lull you gently toward sleep, carrying you on dreams of marble halls, warm courtyards, and the soft footsteps of children learning to walk their path in the ancient world. Word count: 1050. Wind down 300 words. The day winds down, and the hustle of the city softens into a tranquil whisper. You lie back, feeling the weight of your own day settle like a soft cloak, the memories of ancient Rome swirling quietly in your mind. The sounds of the forum, the scent of olive oil and fresh bread, the gentle flicker of oil lamps all fade gently into the background. Imagine yourself in a small, sun-warmed courtyard where shadows stretch long and the air is calm. You breathe deeply, the cool stone beneath you grounding your thoughts. The laughter of children playing has softened to a distant echo, a lullaby sung across centuries. There is comfort in knowing that the rhythms of life, learning, growing, belonging have always been part of the human story. The ancient world, with all its grandeur and grit, mirrors your own journey in quiet, reassuring ways. Let your mind drift, untethered, floating through the soft light of history's embrace. Feel the steady heartbeat of a city that never truly sleeps but knows how to rest, just as you will. Sleep now, gently, peacefully, carried on the quiet wings of time itself.